Sonic Unleashed and Sonic Frontiers are two games that are icons in the franchise and have recently been fan favorites. Sonic Unleashed introduced a boost to mainline games, and Frontiers redefined the adventure style and the open world exploration. But while playing and completing both games, I realized that these two have a lot of similarities. They both have the boost obviously, but they have a combat system, a deep story where characters having internal conflict, open world and less linear movement, etc. There's a lot that they have in common, and today I'm going to answer the one question I've had for a while. Which is better? Our first category is writing, and which game has the better story. In Sonic Unleashed's story, we start with an immaculate cinematic cutscene that shows Eggman has finally won. After he gives Sonic a new transformation, the Werehog, he's plummeted back down to Earth and runs into Chip, who's lost his memory and is dealing with an identity crisis, so Sonic agrees to help him find out who he is again. Later on, we learn that Chip's real name is Light Gaia, and he's in the middle of a 1,000-year war against Dark Gaia. We also learn that Eggman plans to use Dark Gaia to split the Earth apart and destroy it, so it's up to Sonic and Chip to find the Chaos Emeralds and restore the world. In Sonic Frontiers' story, Eggman is on Starfall Islands and is trying to take over technology created by the Ancients, thus creating Sage to protect him. On Sonic's side, he and his friends are introduced to Cyberspace, but when Sonic escapes and lands on Kronos Island, all of his friends are trapped on different islands, so he has to go around and collect memory tokens to try and help them escape Cyberspace, while also defeating the Titans and breaking the barriers. Now both stories are really well thought out, and I think they're some of the best in the series, but I have to give it to Frontiers in terms of character development. Now don't get it wrong, both games have really good development within the characters. In Unleashed, Sonic learns how to use the Werehog better, and Chip becomes stronger and does a better job of conquering his fear against Dark Gaia. We also get a good story about an identity crisis, something we saw in Adventure 2 that really brought a deep meaning. But in Frontiers, we get to see more deep dynamics within Sonic's friends and one of the best moments in the Sonic game.
Sonic, am I a burden to you? Whenever there's a crisis, I'm either running away or standing on the sidelines. You're always rescuing me when all I do is follow you around.
Dude, relax. You've got brains like Eggman, speed like me, and can fly with your butt. It's okay if you still need help sometimes. That's just part of growing up.
So round 1 goes to Frontiers because while it also explores internal issues, it also does a better job at answering long-awaited questions that haven't been touched in years. Our score is 0-1. The next category we have is the art style, so pretty much the animation and graphics. In Unleashed, for a game that came out in 2008, the graphics surprisingly hold up to this day. We start off with a banger opening cutscene that just has some of the best CGI in a Sonic game, and the CGI in general is really well done here. Then towards the end of the game, the animation is still good. With the gameplay, everything feels real fluid, whether you're looking in the background while Sonic's boosting, or things in the levels themselves. The effects are good for a game that came out in 2008, and that's what I like about this. The animation was really ahead of its time. In Frontiers, it's obviously a newer game, so there's going to be way more improvements on modern software, and it doesn't disappoint. You can see that in something like the trailers with how good the CGI and cinematography is. The Switch doesn't do it that much justice, but the PS5 and Xbox versions can obviously run this game with a higher graphical demand, and it brings out the best of it. Like, look how good this frame is. The effects are even more impressive, whether it's the big things like skills or the small things like the particle effects. Now the winner of this category, Unleashed. I like what Frontiers brought in its animation, cutscenes, the CGI, and even the little episodes we see, but I have to give it to Unleashed simply because it was ahead of its time by a significant amount. There are definitely some downgrading changes with the Wii and PS2 version, but the 360 and PS3 version are what makes it a win in this section because of how realistic it looked, especially for a game that came out in 2008. It wasn't afraid to get some frame rate drops or push the limits for its standard at the time, and that's what I think makes it special for its time. So round 2 goes to Unleashed because while Frontiers does a good job with its animation for a modern game, Unleashed was so ahead of its time and pushing limits for a 2008 game. Our score is now 1-1. The next category we have is gameplay. Here, we're counting how fun the styles are, how the speed functions, and how using the boost feels. With Unleashed, the gameplay is split into 2 sections. Daytime stages with the boost formula and nighttime stages with the Werehog combat system. The daytime stages mainly use the boost formula from Rush and they definitely improved from it. With the 3D environment, it really makes you feel like you're zooming at high speeds while also ramming through robots and traps. And with the 2D sections, the platforming tests your reaction time alongside your patience, and in my opinion, that's what Sonic does really well in. With the Werehog, you have a combat/skill tree that ranges from extending your arm to spinning like a needle to grabbing someone in the air. When you're not doing that, you're platforming with the stretchy hands, and it's not bad, but it definitely puts you in split-second positions, where one wrong press is all it takes to make you fall or die. In Frontiers, you have the open world setting obviously, but you also have the boost levels which are drastically different from any other boost game. With the open world part of the game, this is where you're mainly fighting bosses, doing mini games, getting Chaos Emeralds, and helping the Coco. You have your standard moves like the homing attack, stomp, spin dash, etc. But here, you have new moves. He has the side loop that creates energy to catch them off guard, a second version of the homing attack that's a projectile, phantom rush that creates a bunch of different Sonics everywhere, etc. In the Cyberspace levels, these resemble the boost style from earlier games, and there are some drastic changes, specifically with the boost. In this game, they removed the main thing that made the boost fun, the fact that you were moving around at high speeds while also plowing through enemies. Then the fact that things feel more stiff, like stopping to a halt or using the homing attack. It doesn't make the game unbearable, but it definitely takes the speed out of it. So the winner? Unleashed. I admire what Frontiers was trying to do, and the game is still fun to play, but a lot of the movement and speed, especially with the boost, feels too stiff and less expressive, if that makes sense. Unleashed can make you rage quit whenever you accidentally miss a turn, but that's what made the boost fun. It gives you the feeling that you're in this environment and have to think really fast. Both games do a good job with their less linear gameplay, whether that be the Werehog or more open world, but when it comes down to the boost, there's really no debate. So round 3 goes to Unleashed because even though the Werehog slowed down the game, the boost still gave you that feeling of going fast, something a Sonic game is supposed to do. Our score is 2-1. The next category is the level design, so pretty much how interesting the levels are, and also how fun the bosses are to fight. Unleashed, like I said earlier, has the boost in the Werehog, but there's also 2 tornado defense levels sprinkled in there. The daytime stages are pretty fun and honestly some of the best in the franchise. The levels are usually 2 to 6 minutes long and they don't disappoint because there's a lot of content within them without running the risk of being repetitive. My personal favorites gotta be Jungle Joyride with its quick traps, Rooftop Run, and even Eggman Lane. With Eggman Lane, it pretty much tests you on everything you've learned up to this point in a 20 to 40 minute level. Despite many people hating this stage, I think it's fun at times. And then the tornado defense levels have you using the tornado to defeat Eggman's flying robots, and you can't regenerate so you have to think fast. So it's pretty much testing your reflexes. With the boss fights, it also differentiates. The day bosses have you boosting towards them to hit them or running away to have them run into objects. The night bosses will have you throwing/moving objects or attacking the enemy. These fights are pretty simple, but the final boss is actually challenging. In a nutshell, you go from dashing in a temple mech to platforming as regular Sonic and then end it with attacking Dark Gaia's heads by using Super Sonic. For Frontiers, we're mainly just looking at the Cyberspace levels and the boss fights obviously. In the Cyberspace levels, they don't do their own thing and create their own levels. Instead, they reuse a bunch of level designs from past games. You can see some aspects from the tutorial Windmill IO level in Unleashed, Green Hill Act 2 from Generations, Radical Highway from Sonic Adventure 2, and pretty much more from those specific games. In some of the levels, they'll either have you skateboarding, drifting like Unleashed, and a bunch of other gimmicks. With the boss fights, you have the mini bosses and the island bosses. The mini bosses are designed to give you gears to complete Cyberspace levels, and a lot of these are kind of fun. They have you using the moves from your skill tree and they're good for what they bring. But the actual boss fights are even better. These have you fighting a bunch of different titans at Supersonic, and this is just pure fun, especially with the background music. The first time I fought the titan in Kronos Island and when I heard Undefeatable, I knew the boss fights would be fun. It honestly is more fun and easier than most Sonic fights in the franchise. So the winner? Unleashed for 3 times in a row. Both games do have fun and well-designed boss fights, and I think that's one of Frontiers' strengths, but if we're solely going off of the boost levels, then Unleashed easily has that. I'm not really the biggest fan of reusing past designs on the stage though. I'm okay with using the aesthetic like how Generations redid old stages, but if they just used the same layout with no changes, it wouldn't have been that interesting. Also, some of the Frontiers levels like the Drift level are just abysmal. So Unleashed wins this round of level design, and the score is now 3-1. The next category is the combat system, so how fun the moves are and how accessible it is. Unleashed mainly has the skill tree and the Werehog levels, and there's a lot of variety. Like I said earlier, the way you use these moves is by a lot of different button combinations, so kind of like a Mortal Kombat game. You can go from a bunch of different slashes to cartwheeling around to spinning like a needle to slamming someone on the ground and anything else you can think of. In my opinion, you shouldn't just go for one move because you can mash over and over with no problem, so it shouldn't be that big a deal. A lot of these can also be used to skip sections and give you a bunch of shortcuts, and I think that gives it a boost in being useful and not just a gimmick, if that makes sense. Frontiers' skill tree is not only used by Sonic, but also by his friends in Final Horizon. The way you do this is also by a bunch of different button inputs, but it's a lot easier since it's a few buttons for different attacks. Everyone has the standard boost, wall climb, stomp, slide, etc., but the skill tree gives you moves that are references from older games. With Sonic, he can create a bunch of clones, which is a game original, Knuckles can turn into a drill, Tails can create a bunch of machines, and Amy can use the tarot cards. This isn't like Unleashed where majority of the moves create a fast-paced style of gameplay since they play short cinematic animations, but I really have no problem with it. So the winner of this category? Both games. I honestly couldn't choose between them because they both bring really good stuff to the table. Unleashed brings more moves and creates a fast style of gameplay, and Frontiers lets you choose between 4 characters for more diversity in the moves. This is something that both games do really well, and honestly they made me realize how much I want skill trees in more games. Even though Battle did the whole skill tree thing first, Unleashed and Frontiers made it better over time. So both games tie in this section and our score is now 4-2. The next category we have is the soundtrack, so how good the background music is and how good the production is. Unleashed has a banger lineup of music, and I've said this before, but it might be the best in the franchise. If you're a regular to my channel, then you've heard this music in the background multiple times, and there's definitely a reason as to why I use this. The music slaps. Since we're traveling around the world, you can hear and see all the different cultures represented, something I forgot to mention in the level design. But you can definitely hear the cultures represented in the music. Spagonia uses a lot of strings and jazz instruments to represent Italy and Spain. Chunnun uses, I'm not even going to pronounce that, to represent East Asia. Empire City uses jazz instruments to represent New York jazz, etc. They all do a really good job of representing the cultures in the game. The boss music is your standard boss music and it's still pretty good, but the location-based music is just S tier. And Endless Possibilities. Do I even need to say anything else? Frontiers' music is honestly on the same level. Whether you're just roaming around the island or in the cyberspace levels, they're also really good. In fact, you're hearing Undefeatable in the background because that's genuinely one of my favorite songs in the franchise. Most of the game's soundtrack uses EDM tracks, and I like EDM more because of this game. Flowing is easily one of the best tracks because it's one of the more upbeat tracks, and I still like it for what it is. It's very clear that Otari did a good job because he understood the assignment and did extra credit. He gave Kellen Quinn the biggest layup and he did not miss. He performed a lot more rock music for the boss fights and gave us bangers like Undefeatable, Break Through It All, and Find Your Flame. Something else the game offers is switching the soundtrack whenever you like, and that's something Frontiers has the advantage over because that wasn't a thing back then until Generations. So I can appreciate that for bringing some customization. So the winner? Both games again. It's honestly getting harder to find out which game is better now because in these later sections, both games have more to offer to help balance the competition out. Unleashed represents more cultures within the music and Frontiers gives us more vocal tracks and EDM, which is some of Sonic's best music. You even hear more EDM after Frontiers in games like Shadow Generations. Frontiers wasn't the only game to have these types of tracks, but it still carries over because they know how to do it right. And with Unleashed, I admire how they went through the different cultures and tried to represent it to the best of their abilities. Greece, Italy, East Asia, the Middle East, anything in the game. So both games tie again and our score is now 5-3. And our last category is the reception and how well it's been received in the community, whether it took longer or not. With Unleashed, everyone pretty much knows the story at this point. For a while, this game was one of the biggest punching bags because of one specific company that everyone clowns, IGN. Before they switched up with the whole Sonic does what Nintendo don't thing, they never changed their view on Unleashed after this guy gave it the infamous 4.5 out of 10. For a while, it was a punching bag, but in 2022, they actually put it in their top 10 games and fired the initial reviewer. And ever since then, more people have been trying to emulate it, advocating for a modern console port, modding new characters and levels in, modding levels into Generations, etc. It even got an unofficial official PC port a few months ago, so you can see that people have been warming up to this game ever since its initial release. Frontiers, on the other hand, has had better reception since 2022. Even before it launched, people were really excited that Sega was trying an actual open world game with Sonic. Then when the game finally released, it was met with love, but also some mixed receptions. The love came from, like I said, people being excited for a Sonic open world game. And most of the things the game brought, people liked. The story, the graphics, the music, etc. The mixed reception, however, came from the gameplay. Some people liked the gameplay and level design, but other people didn't like how Sonic speed was dealt with or the fact that levels were reusing designs. But outside of that, people have modded new animations, new characters, new costumes, new levels, and it even got good scores, mainly 7 out of 10s all around. So the winner of this final category? Frontiers. I was thinking of giving both games a point again, but you really have to think about it. It took Unleashed a little over a decade to finally get universal love. Frontiers had more love from the jump. Now the modding community for both games is insanely strong, with both games adding new characters and animations, but if we're talking about the base games alone, Frontiers solos. I still have Unleashed as one of my favorite games, but Frontiers was just born with more love. So the final round goes to Frontiers and our final score is 5-4. So after comparing the two games, I've decided that Unleashed is the better game. I still think Frontiers is a good game and it definitely had more love in its life, but in terms of the actual gameplay, Unleashed still has the advantage. Despite it being a little loose, it has better boost functionality, more creative level design, and more diversity in the combat system. However, even though I think Unleashed is a better game, I can still give my flowers to Frontiers. I like the open world approach it introduced, and I wouldn't mind more because it might get me into more open world games. I still like the story for it giving us the Tails moment, and overall it's not a bad game. So I can still respect Frontiers despite Unleashed winning in this video. But anyways, I'm gonna end it right here. Which game do you think is better? And with that, Zazaz out.